about the next lecture. Probably can't see it, but it's Dr. Harry Witchell from the Brighton and Sussex Medical School. He's going to be talking about his new book, or his most recent book, which is called You Are What You Hear, How Music and Territory Make Us Who We Are. So it's a kind of a music and evolution thing. It's on the 26th of January. It's going to be half an hour later than this one, so you arrive at 5 for wine. You're going to have more wine next time, so yeah, sorry whoever didn't get any. And it's going to be, the actual talk is going to be from 5:30 till 6:30. He's incredibly entertaining. Facebook event's going to be up a little bit later on today. So yeah, sign up, make yourself attending, and you can tweet along today, by the way, if you want. The hashtag is UCL Nutt lecture. So yeah, I don't think he needs any introduction.
And join up. I want at least 50 more followers, right?
Yeah. Everyone, Professor David Nutt.
Well, it's really a pleasure to be here because, well, for reasons which will be clear as I go through my talk, UC has had a significant influence on me and some of the thinking around the topic I'm going to share with you. So it's great to be here, and it was nice to have the idea of bringing a bit more psychology into the whole drugs policy issue. So this is a unique talk for that reason. So just a few words about who I am. Some of you probably know me as a psychiatrist, but actually I was a psychology undergraduate, and I wasn't good enough, obviously, to make it in that field. But what's interesting, I forgot until putting this talk together, that I actually applied to here, to UC. And they never replied back. So I went to Cambridge, and then... and what was interesting is in Cambridge it's very easy to change courses, so I changed from psychology to medicine because I decided at an early age that what I was interested in was giving drugs to people, and I thought it's probably best if you're a doctor to do that. Although I know there are people in this audience who do it without your headaches. They're just cleverer than me. I'm a psychiatrist. I like to say to people with a name like mine, there were very few career options. And then in the audience, probably think of others, but anyway, we'll move on swiftly. So mostly I've done research. I went into medicine to do research. I've been fortunate in being able to do that, and I continued largely to research in the UK, but I did work in the US. I ran the Alcohol Institute inpatient facility for NIH for a couple of years, and I also worked a bit in Australia, but mostly I'm UK-based. I'm a parent of 4 post-teenage children. Thank God. They're almost out of it. And the financial pressure, that is. And I've seen a lot of things, not necessarily through them, but through their friends, that I prefer not to have seen. And they certainly weren't on the cards when we planned to have them. But anyway, they're very much like you lot. And it's amazing to see how young you all are, actually. I feel quite intimidated. And I'm an ex-government drug advisor, which is, of course, why I'm here. None of you had really heard about me. Not even the psychologists had heard about me before I got sacked. So, this is a brilliant caricature, not of me, because I'm better looking than that, but because of what it's... can we turn this front light out? Is it possible to turn the lights out down here? Well, what it shows is it sums up the debate of my sacking. So it shows the book of cannabis falling from my hand, and it shows the most important point on the bottom there, the scales of justice. You see the scales of justice on one side, the traditional drugs, beer and fags, and on the other side, new things. I don't know what they are. That's one of the problems. No one knows what they are. But anyway, they're a great concern to society and to politicians in particular. And you can see the argument summed up in that one image is that my contention is that beer and fags are worse than the other stuff, and we should at least have a balanced view of the way we treat drug use, whether it's legal drugs or illegal drugs. But this front page is also interesting for another reason, which is that, so I'll just go into the lights here. Let's try that. Yeah. The top left, and you know, remarkably, the coincidence of my sacking and Andre Agassi's biography. Now, I realise most of you are too young even to know who Andre Agassi was, but he was a very good tennis player. And soon after he won the Wimbledon Championship, he tested positive for methamphetamine. And for reasons which are not entirely clear, but were quite common in sport, the rules of that particular sport said that if he was found to have taken the drug, he would be banned for a minimum of 2 years and maybe for life. And that presented the tennis authorities with a huge problem. Banning the #1 player in the world would have created a bit of a stir. So they did what I thought was a rather English thing. They decided to ask him to tell the truth. And it's a bit like Coulson, really. It's sort of the same principle going back. And Andre, did you take crystal meth? He said, of course not. Test. It must have been an accident. There's something wrong with the test. So they said, oh, great, cool. Go back and win some more tournaments. So he went back and he played tennis, and he did win some more majors. And then 15 years or so later, when he's falling on harder times and he decides to make some money through writing his autobiography, he tells the truth. Now, I don't know whether that was the burden of guilt hanging over him for all those years, or whether it was a few million extra dollars in sales. I suspect the latter, I don't know. But the fact that it's on the front page of this magazine tells you a lot about the ambivalent attitude we have to drugs. So the tennis authorities would abandon and destroy his career, and we buy more of his books because he took the drug. And this tension between prohibition and interest and entertainment really permeates much of the debate about drugs. Now, one of the reasons that my sacking was known to many people was because it divided the media completely. The BBC were hugely supportive, as were at least two of the broadsheets, The Independent and The Guardian. But there are some other things which call themselves newspapers. I don't suppose any of you have ever seen them, you wouldn't own up to it, but they took the opposite view. And the Sun likes to call me Professor Poison. And Melanie is not in the room, is she? Okay, so her view is that I'm part of a manipulative, subversive and lethally dangerous clique. Now, actually, she's for once right. But the problem is I've not yet met anyone else who's from that clique. So if you're in the audience, could you see the afterwards and you can really start moving things? They did something else rather irritatingly subsequently, which is the Sun hacked into the Facebook sites of 3 of my children, and I had this very horrible phone call. A week after I was sacked, I was sitting at Heathrow, I was going up to give a lecture, and I got a phone call from some guy who said, I work for the Sun. And he sort of said, yeah. He says, we're going to do a 2-page expose of your children's drug taking tomorrow. What do you say about that? And this is quite an interesting test of your ability to reason quickly, because you know what you want to say, and you know if you do, they'll put it over the front page, not page 3 or page 6. So you have to really bite your tongue, and I just said, it's completely inappropriate, and put the phone down. And then I rang the Press Complaints Authority and said, can you stop them doing this? Because it's completely gratuitous, that my children have nothing to do with my opinions. And they said, we'll try, but they failed. And once the Sun ran it, then the Mail on Sunday ran it, and the News of the World ran it, and the Mail ran it. And eventually, the Sun took it down. After complaints from the PCC, the Sun took it down. But the Daily Mail didn't. In fact, it's strange. It's only just taken it down. And I wonder if that's got something to do with the fact that Leveson is now looking at press interference with individuals. And, of course, the reason the Mail didn't respond to the PCC was because the Mail editor chairs the PCC. So it really is the magistrates essentially adjudicating themselves. There was a great public response. We had a Facebook site set up by the Students for a Sensible Drug Policy, 30,000 supporters, 2,000 scientists signed a petition to Downing Street asking for my reinstatement. Well, you can bet that didn't happen. And there was a Students for a Sensible Drug Policy coordinated a protest outside Downing Street. And I know some university college students were there, so thank you very much for that. It was very heartening to know that there were at least some sane people in this world who were actually prepared to stand up on a cold November afternoon and make the point that sacking scientists simply pointing out the truth about drugs is an absurd way for government to behave. So thank any of you who were there. But why was I sacked? Well, it's not entirely clear. I mean, It's not clear for two reasons. One is that I don't think they really know, and the second is that the person that did it, Alan Johnson's still in government, well not in government, still in Parliament, and we'll have to wait for his memoirs if you can remember by then, but we'll see. But they said I was getting involved in policy, which is government speak, because I was saying current policy was not evidence-based. They said I was giving mixed messages, and what I said was, given that under my tenure as chairman of the ACMD, we had actually made GHB illegal, it would be possible, one should consider that if alcohol were to be discovered today, that too would be made illegal if you apply the same rules, because they're essentially similar compounds. So that's a mixed message, which is two different alcohols have the same effect as the brain. They've lost confidence in me, which is political speak for I wouldn't toe the line, and they were objecting to the fact that a lecture that I published, I hadn't told them I was actually putting the lecture into the public domain the day before I was sacked. And I still, to the life of me, still this day, cannot understand why a scientist, even if he works for government, should ask permission or even necessarily tell government that you're actually putting something. Particularly it was a lecture that I'd given about 4 months before, which they'd actually been at. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get back to the science. So what is a drug? Well, who says what a drug is? Well, I'm a psychopharmacologist, and this is the tenor of my attitude to drugs. And a lot of those 500 papers have been based on that. So don't knock it. It's easier than that. There's another take, of course, which is this, something a politician once used, but now regrets. Jackie Smith was the Home Secretary before Alan Johnson. I had run into it, I'll tell you about it in a minute. And I do feel sorry for her, forcing herself to be part of the crowd at Oxford smoking cannabis when she didn't enjoy it. And David, we don't know if he enjoyed it or not, but I'll certainly tell you more about his drug use in a minute. I mean, some politicians are honest. Tim Yeo, a man of many mistresses, and he likes life and he likes cannabis. No credit to him. Boris, very, very shrewd. And of course, there's always the other side of the pond. I wouldn't, as George said, I wouldn't answer the marijuana question. You know why? Because I don't want So, as I said, this is the talk that I've given many times. So I wanted to focus a little bit more on psychology because of the practice of psychological society hosting it. So I thought I'd look at some of the psychological processes which underpin, or seem to explain at the very least, some of this confused attitude we have to drugs. And I thought we'd start with denial. Now, Sigmund Freud was not exactly a UC graduate, but he did live up the road, and I guess he's spiritually embedded in this university, certainly more than Imperial anyway. So it's worth sort of, at least bringing him to your attention. And denial is a defense mechanism in which, when a person is faced with a fact that is too uncomfortable to accept, they reject it, insisting it's not true, despite what may be overwhelming evidence. And denial is the way governments over the last century have dealt with alcohol. The drinks industry also deals with alcohol in the same way, because they do not want you to believe it's a drug. And when we did our panorama program a few years ago, Britain's Top 20 Drugs, we asked people in the street, is alcohol a drug? And they say no. And you say, well, look, you take it, it makes you feel different, you can get very drunk, you can fall over, you can vomit, you can get hangovers the next day, surely it's a drug. And they say, no, if it was a drug, it would be banned, wouldn't it? The reason alcohol is thought of differently to other drugs is because there's a huge pressure from the drinks industry to ensure that we keep ignoring its pharmacology. What I would say is this: a drug's a chemical which, when taken, produces physiological changes, and in the context of the discussion today is about pleasurable, desirable effects in the brain, or, in some sad cases, damaging effects. And here are two images of dead students. The one on the right is the most famous image, I think, of anyone who dying from a drug effect in this country. This is Leah Betts. Have you all seen that? I mean, how many of you have not seen that image? again, you're all very young. So this was plastered on billboards or over Britain in the early 90s. Leah Betts died on just after 18th birthday. On that birthday, the therapy took 2 ecstasy tablets, which in those days contained between 30 and 40 milligrams of ecstasy. And she believed that if she felt strange on the drug, it was due to dehydration. So she drank lots of water. And of course, she wasn't exercising, she was just preparing a house for her 18th birthday party. So she drank 7 litres of water, and she died of water poisoning. And her face emerged on billboards around the country, saying sorted, because sorted was a term that people used when they were buying drugs, and it was a closure word. And it was put out that she died of MDMA poisoning, and that people should therefore not use MDMA. And we don't know who put those images up. It wasn't, I thought at the time it was Department of Health, but it wasn't. I think it was probably some arm's length organisation funded by the drinks industry, who were very worried at the time that people would stop drinking and use drugs and raves instead. On the left-hand side, there's a student from Exeter University in the golf team, went on a golf match, and after the golf match, engaged in a drinking game, obviously lost, and lost his life as a consequence. And the people that sold Leah Betts her ecstasy, the guy went to prison for 6 months. The friends of his who killed him in a drinking game, but they weren't punished. I imagine they feel pretty bad about it. But it's not uncommon. However, you don't know much about it because that didn't make the billboards and that didn't make the front page of newspapers for it. And of course there's Amy. Amy's the most recent high-profile case of death from acute alcohol poisoning with a blood alcohol of 450 milligrams %. Imperial had a student die last year after he went to a all-you-could-drink evening in the student's bar in South Ken and died. So acute alcohol poisoning is a common cause of death. And this is quite an interesting mixture of a case example of a young boy on his 18th birthday taken out by his mates, given a huge amount of drink in the space of an hour. They thought they were giving him a good time, but they were killing him because he got very drunk, went home to sleep it off and died in his sleep. This is the most absurd story. This is an example of how when you are drinking, your judgment is eroded. So here's someone who's drinking in a hotel bar and then engaged in a competition with his friends to see if he could achieve the goal. Who could drink a bottle of vodka as fastest? And he drank a bottle of vodka and he died. And so alcohol is not only toxic, but alcohol makes you do stupid things like engage in these kind of drinking games. And this on the left here is a page from the Metro. It's what was it, the Metro or the Mail? Yeah, it's the Metro, yeah. And it shows that for a small woman, and there's a lot of you a small woman, if you drink 9 large glasses of wine in an hour, you will die. Because that's effectively what Winehouse did, although she drank too big, she drank a bit more. But that just shows, you know, it's not difficult, and it's certainly not expensive to kill yourself with alcohol. About 3 young people a week die of alcohol overdose. About 10 die of accidents, like driving their cars into trees or other people or other cars. And they often die on their birthdays, which is disturbing repeatedly for the families. And one of the reasons we've argued that cannabis is safer than alcohol is that no one's ever died of cannabis overdose. I want to know how you might do it. And also, when I was on the ACMD, we did a very systematic review of date rape. And we looked at evidence from 2 police forces around the country, plus other pieces of data. And we came to the conclusion that half of all date rape is just alcohol, and half is alcohol plus other drugs. So by far and away, alcohol is the most dangerous drug in terms of date rape for women. And it also causes such bad misjudgment that it leads to a large number of people dying, jumping from things. And this is a guy who died jumping out of across chalet roofs in Courchevel. You know, that's where the rich die. When I was in Mallorca recently, I was talking to them about this, and they said each week in the summer season in Mallorca, an overseas tourist dies, a man dies jumping. They try to jump between balconies, or they try to jump from the balcony into the swimming pool, and they miss. And they judge them impaired by drink. And I've been interested in dying through jumping because of the idea that was put out when LSD was banned in the 60s. The example of damage was people trying to fly. I've never managed to find the case reported, but it's claimed that that's the reason people were, if the drug was banned, because it could kill people if they didn't realise they couldn't fly. But I would contend that more people in Britain to die every year from jumping when drunk than have ever died under the influence of others, probably worldwide. And here's some terrifying data, WHO data, a couple of months old now, showing that alcohol is the major cause of disability in young people worldwide. On the left are men, on the right are women. The green bars are alcohol-induced disability. For men, alcohol is overwhelmingly the biggest cause of disability. For women, sexual dysfunction and sexual transmitted disease and anemia are big. Collate the two, alcohol, biggest cause of disability worldwide. 1.5 million people a year die of alcohol, more than die of malaria, more than die of tuberculosis, more than die of meningitis. And in Europe, in men, the blue bars, alcohol, the latest data from late last year, alcohol is the biggest cause of disability in men in Europe. And it's causing huge burden to the NHS. You see this transition in 95, 96, about 94,000 hospital admissions with alcohol. 10 years on, there were 208,000, sorry. And the latest 2009 data, there were 1 million hospital episodes, of which 13,000 were under 18s. Ecstasy, like drugs, about 2,000, cannabis, about 700. So there's orders of magnitude difference in the health costs of alcohol compared with other drugs. The reason there's a big rise in deaths from alcohol is shown on this slide. So the red bar, the line, the red diamonds, are the actual intake of alcohol in the population as an average. If you go back to 1971, we were drinking about 7 litres of absolute alcohol a year. And now, on the latest data we have, we're drinking about 11 or 12. So it's about doubled in the space of 40 years. The reason it's doubled is shown by the red bars. The affordability has gone up from alcohol, tracks affordability extremely well. The only time it began to fall was there in the early 80s and then in the early 90s. And the early 90s was the beginning of the rave scene. And that was where the alcohol industry started getting very exercised by the fact that people might change their whole behaviour. And they thought that threat by bringing out alcohol pops and by bringing out these super strength fibers to make sure people could get enough alcohol cheaply. And this is perhaps the most chilling graph of all. So this looks at standardised mortality rates, the likelihood of you dying from any of these disorders. And it tracked back the same 40 years to 1971. And you can see for every disorder other than liver disease, standardised mortality rates have gone down. So some of them have gone down by to a third of what they were before. Liver disease has gone up by 2.5 times. So the differentiation is huge. And we have now an epidemic of liver disease, which is consuming vast amounts of hospital resources. And it's been predicted that within 10 years, liver disease will kill more people than heart disease. And there's George Best, very successful footballer. But there's him dying. That's another famous image of someone dying of drugs. But here he is dying after his second liver transplant. Now what about cannabis? Well, this is the guy that sacked me, Johnson. I think I'm one of the guys in the spliff there. That's the one under the strata. So we deny the damage of alcohol. What do we think? How do we deal with cannabis? Well, here's the other concept, another concept in psychology, the concept of projection. So there's Freud's daughter, Anna Freud, also lived up the road. I used to work down the road at Tavistock. And so she really developed this concept of projection, a defense mechanism where a person subconsciously denies their own attributes, thoughts, emotions, which are then ascribed to the outside world and then become facts. And an example of projection is that cannabis is very dangerous and causes schizophrenia. Let's look to see what's happened with cannabis over the same 40 years as we looked at alcohol. And you see it's increased. It's increased by 20-fold the number of people who've ever smoked. And that's true throughout the Western world. So if cannabis was really causing schizophrenia, you'd imagine there might be some increase in schizophrenia. But there isn't. Nowhere, anywhere can you find any increase in schizophrenia that relates to the massive increase in cannabis use. Nowhere. In fact, if anything, schizophrenia is declining in the UK and maybe elsewhere in the world. So The idea that cannabis causes schizophrenia is a myth. And as I say, it's a kind of projection by people who want to justify cannabis being illegal. It probably has a small impact on incidence or the onset of schizophrenia. But we estimated, this is the ACMD, that to prevent one case of schizophrenia, you'd have to stop 5,000 young men or 7,000 young women from ever smoking to stop one case. So this is not, in any sense, a public health approach. You certainly can't reduce schizophrenia by criminalising cannabis. And we said, look, cannabis is Class C, an appropriate place for it if you believe in classification. There's absolutely no need to upgrade it because the cannabis schizophrenia story is not justification for regrading cannabis. However, Jackie Smith decided that she would, despite what we said. And the reasons she gave for making it Class B were based on possible risk, public perception, and policing priorities. And as I'll show you in a minute, that completely contravenes the whole basis of the legitimacy project. And there is this rumour that Gordon Brown did a deal with the Daily Mail, that they would actually support Labour, which they've never done in history, if the Labour Party agreed to three things, one of which was reclassifying cannabis. Now, he hasn't told us if that's true or not, but it's certainly perfectly credible. Then there's a third psychological process, which is delusions. And you hopefully know who those people are, that's Tony Blair. And the delusion system here is that wars can be won without casualties. And that was kind of what they thought. They thought they'd won the war in Iraq just because they bombed the shit out of it, at a distance. And then they realised that actually that hadn't really achieved anything other than kill people. And so then they had to go with the ground troops. And whether we won the war in Iraq or not, I guess is a moot point. But Tony got very entranced by being a war leader. And he decided after waging the war in Iraq, he would wage a war on drugs. And he set up a war cabinet, defense ministries, senior policemen, senior customs officers, independent of the ACMD, to wage a war on drugs. And there are some important aphorisms about war, which you need to know about. And one of them is the first casualty of war is the truth. And this war on drugs started by attacking the mushrooms, which up till that point were not controlled drugs. But goaded on by the Daily Mail, Tony Blair decided he was going to make mushrooms a controlled drug. And he made them a Class A drug. And we heard he was thinking about this, and we, as the ACMD, said to him, well, look, that's illegal. You've got to consult with us. You can't just change the law on drugs without getting expert advice. And there was a silence for a few minutes. And on a Tuesday night, we got an email from the Home Office saying there's going to be a debate in the Commons on Thursday about the classification of magic mushrooms. What's the ACMD's view? And we said, look, it's an insult. You can't give us 36 hours to do a proper harm assessment on the drug. So go ahead and do it. You don't listen to, the law doesn't really impinge on your mentality anyway. So, and they did, and they took magic mushrooms and made them a Class A drug alongside crack, cocaine, and heroin. And at that point, that was when I began to think, this is mad. We are really entering Alice in Wonderland, and we're doing it without having taken anything. How can any sensible system have magic mushrooms as Class A? And so I started arguing, and then I was sacked eventually, and subsequently, I remembered this aphorism: once at war, always mistake. And of course, it's perfect sense. If you're fighting a war, you don't want people telling you you're doing wrong. And the conundrum about cannabis, the war on cannabis, which I'll show you about in a minute, is that about half young people try it. Very few experience health harm. There's very little harm to society. But current government policy was directed at criminalising people, and that was why they made it back to Class B. And criminalisation has much greater harms to an individual than the drug. It ruins future prospects of getting certainly into the civil service, into medicine, or into other professions. It has no impact on health. And denies access of people who need it for